Okay, some things about using a knife. First of all, your cutting surface needs to be secure, needs to be steady. You're going to take a wet rag, lay it on your countertop, put your cutting board on top of that rag just like that, and now that cutting board is not going to slide around. There's different types of knives. The types of knives that we use here in tailors are a chef knife. This is what we use most of the time. It's distinctive. It has a drop to the blade and accommodates then putting your hand around the knife so that it makes room for your knuckles. So your knuckles aren't hitting the surface of the board when you cut with that knife. It holds your knuckles off the board. We use a chef's knife for most of what we do. When you hold that knife, hold it real firmly in your hand, like Brock is showing you. If you have a smaller hand, put your finger, your forefinger, and your thumb on the blade of that knife, and that will hold that very securely. And actually, Brock, you can put your finger right on the blade. Now, move it up just like that. You can actually hang right onto the blade itself if you're up to the top of the blade, just like that. And that's a good secure position for your hand. When you're slice, you're going to slice toe heel, like that. When you chop, you're going to put your left hand if you're right-handed, or your right hand if you're left-handed. Excuse me. Yes. And you're going to chop just like this. When you have your item chopped up pretty well, then sometimes you want to move the knife up and down as a whole. You can do that also, yes, and just like that. There you go. Okay, to do a julienne slice, Brock's going to show you how to do that with a red pepper. He's coring the pepper, takes all the white out. Then you're going to lay your pepper flat into julienne. Notice how he has the fingers on his left hand curved. The tips of his fingers are pulled back away from the edge of the knife, and he's using the knuckles of his left hand to guide the knife as he slices. So when you're cutting, you want to be sure that you have your left hand in that position. It's holding the product, but it's keeping your fingers away from the knife. It's keeping your fingers back from that knife edge. It's important that you do that. Okay, there's your julienne slice. Nice and easy, doesn't take any time at all. Now I'm going to ask Brock to go ahead and chop those. And again, he's holding his fingertips back from the edge of the knife. He's making nice even cuts, so he has a nice even dice on that pepper. Now, if I say, Brock, what I really want you to do is mince that up without using a blender, he's going to put it all together like that, and then he's going to do a dice like this. And he's going to mince that to where it's nice and fine. Notice his left hand, the fingers are out straight. You never want to curve your finger around the edge of that knife because you'll cut your fingers off. The left hand controls one end of the knife, the right hand controls the other end of the knife. Okay, another important point. When you're using a knife, you're always looking at the knife. When your buddies come up and talk to you, and you look up to talk to your buddies, you're going to lay your knife down, you're going to stop doing what you're doing with your knife. If you look away from that knife, that is when you cut yourself. So remember, if you have a knife in your hand, it's not a chit-chat time. As long as you're looking at the product you're working with, you are going to be safe. The minute you look away from that product, you're going to cut yourself. So remember that when you're using a knife. Okay, with your serrated knife, you use a serrated knife primarily for bread. And again, it has a rough edge, and it's designed for cutting all kinds of bread. When you use a serrated knife, you're going to use it like a saw. You don't press down, you saw back and forth. And if you use it like a saw, just like Brock is doing here, you can see that you get a nice even slice. You're not crumbing the bread, you're not squishing the bread. It's exactly what that knife is designed for. So when I tell you to get a serrated knife for your station, make sure that you get a serrated knife If you're at a station that's making sandwiches, slicing sandwiches, you have to have a serrated knife at your station. Your boning knife, the other knife that we have here in our kitchen, we use for trimming silver skin off of our pork tenderloins. We'll use it for cutting our sirloin steaks. And then if we are going to debone anything, we'll use it for that. This takes a certain amount of skill, and so for my students, I doubt that I'll have you using a boning knife for anything other than cutting the cakes. It's got a nice thin blade, and that's why we're using it for cutting our cakes. It doesn't pull the frosting off. The other thing to remember when using knives is cross-contamination. If you're cutting a chicken product, you're going to have a cutting board and a knife for the chicken. If you're cutting a pork product, you're going to have a cutting board and a knife for the pork. If you're cutting a vegetable product, you have a cutting board and a knife for the vegetable product, etc. When you are finished cutting that product, you finish slicing your chicken, you're done with that for the day, you're going to take that knife and you're going to wash it and you're going to sanitize it. It has got to be sanitized. During the shift, make sure that you never take that knife that you've cut the chicken with and cut anything else but chicken. It's one of the biggest sources of cross-contamination. And again, when you're done with your product, you not only have to wash that knife, you have to sanitize that knife. So you're going to have a cutting board at your station for chicken, if you're doing chicken, for pork, if you're doing pork, for beef, if you're doing beef, for vegetables, if you're doing vegetables, for bread, if you're doing bread. You have to have a separate cutting board and a separate knife for each one of those food products. And again, when you're done with them, you got to wash them and sanitize them.